Hey, my name is Matt Douthit. I'm a naturalist here at Jefferson Memorial Forest, and I want to introduce the topic and how-to of a Three Sisters garden. So if you want more info, we have links and a quick blog post, and that shares more info and also history. All right, I'm here at our garden site. We have already turned over the dirt. I think our size is going to be about 10 feet by 10 feet. Now, where you decide to place your Three Sisters garden is going to be important. If you've grown vegetables before, you know you need a lot of sunlight. So we need at least 6 hours of sunlight. There are some cool activities online about sun mapping. If you've never done that in your backyard, it's a lot of fun. Map where the sun is in your backyard. It's also a technique when you go to plot out a garden. You are going to need to see where the sun is and is not in your yard throughout the day, not just in one part of the day. So that's something you need to think about when you go to place your garden. If you plant these in the shade, they're not going to do very well. So like I said, ours is about 10 feet by 10 feet. And we're going to alternate hills. We're going to have one hill of corn and beans, and then the next hill is going to be squash because they spread out a lot, and then corn and beans, and then a hill of squash. Now the size of your garden is going to be decided by a few things. First and foremost, it's going to be decided by your yard or your garden space, or even your community garden, like you have a raised bed. So some of the size of your garden is just based on your space, but also it's going to be based on the seeds that you choose. For our corn, we are going to need some kind of tall variety, dent, flint, flower. Now for beans, we don't want bush beans, we want pole beans. Those are the ones that are going to climb, so we need pole beans, lima, runner, common beans. And then for squash, depending on the size, if you have a smaller space, you're probably going to want summer squash. If you have a larger space, you could go for a winter squash. Hopefully you all know what pollination is. I'll give you a chance to answer. What is pollination? Does anybody know? Okay, cool. Does anybody know the different types of pollination? We got a couple different types of pollination that we're thinking of when we say pollination. Okay, well, for those that don't know, I'll tell you. So pollination is how a plant creates more of itself. Okay, this is the process that a plant is able to spread pollen to another plant and thereby produce a seed. So there's self-pollination and then there's cross-pollination. So there are plants that are able to pollinate just themselves, which is pretty cool. You only need one plant for it to create seeds or fruit. So cross-pollination is wind pollinated. Those are usually green flowers. They're not attracting insects. The wind blows the pollen and that is spread to another flower on another plant or even on the same plant. And then there's animal pollination, or what we usually think of as insects. And so insects fly to very showy, bright, colorful flowers, and they are spreading the pollen physically. There's actually an example of each one of these types of pollination in our Three Sisters garden. Squash are actually insect pollinated, and they have really pretty little flowers. So we'll need a few squash planted in our garden in order for us to produce fruit to have squash. Beans are actually self-pollinated. Beans, you only need one plant. Corn are wind pollinated, and in order for wind pollinated plants to do well, we want to plant as many as we can. If you have a small space like a raised garden bed and that's the only space you have, it is possible you could get corn from maybe only 2 or 3 corn plants, but it's probably not likely. So if you have the space, you want to plant as many corn plants as possible. We've got our mounds about 12 or 18 inches tall. We need them kind of flat topped, and now we're ready to plant our seeds. I'm not too worried about all of the weeds or the grass. That is easy to come back through as our plants start to grow. We can pull those out just one at a time. The nice thing about this garden is the weeding is fairly simple. You only need to weed just what's around your mound, and then once the squash comes in with the big huge leaves, they actually shade out a lot of those weeds. So we're going to plant 3 to 4 corn seeds in this hill here. They need to be about 6 inches apart and about 1 inch deep. So I'm gonna go ahead and push these guys down in here about 1 inch in the ground and make sure those are covered. And then once these get to be about 4 to 6 inches tall, I can come back and I can plant my beans next to these, and those need to be about 3 inches apart from these, and they'll start climbing. We want to give the corn time to get established, and then once the beans are in the ground, I can also plant my squash. Now they're in their separate mounds. This is one of my favorite books. It talks about the Shawnee by Jerry E. Clark, University Press of Kentucky. If you're interested in one of the tribes that called present-day Kentucky their home, this is something really cool to read about. And there's actually a reference in here that explains what their process for gardening was, and I thought I'd share it with you all. The Shawnee women planted several varieties of corn, including red corn, a dark blue corn, a soft white corn, and a hard white or glass corn, each of which had a special use. Kernels to be planted were coated with grease or dipped in water in which fish bones had been soaked. No attention was paid to the phases of the moon, but corn, beans, and squash were planted early in the morning. Corn was planted in hills about 4 feet apart, and the hills were in rows about 3 feet apart, oriented in an east to west direction. Irrigation was not practiced, and the only fertilizer used was ash left on the ground after clearing. They burned areas in order to clear it. Beans, gourds, pumpkins, squash, and sunflowers were also used in the patch, and in a more southerly areas, sweet potatoes were raised, and in Virginia, even tobacco was noted. It's not known whether the Shawnee ever raised tobacco in Kentucky. All right, so hey, we got a pretty good start. We got our corn mostly planted. We're gonna finish up here just a little bit. If you wanna try this at home, I would encourage you to do so. You've got until about the end of May to get your corn planted. That's the first thing you plant. So if you want to try this at home, it's really simple. This is a garden that almost takes care of itself. You'll have to do a few things. It does look a little wild and crazy when you plant this garden. It's not the neat little rows you might be used to if you have gardened before. I would encourage you, if you do plant this garden at home, I would encourage you all use the hashtag JMF3, the number 3 sisters, JMF3 sisters. We want to see what you all, how your gardens are doing, and maybe ideas or experience that you've had. So please, I'd encourage you to try this garden out. It's very simple. Share your progress. We are going to be sharing our progress. We're going to make some updates so you can kind of see how our garden's doing. If you want more info, our blog, we're going to share, we'll have links and also some history. Ours is going to be mostly specific to Kentucky, but there's a lot of info because this was a pretty widely used method. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you all have really good luck with your gardens.